Hello and welcome to Celebrity Chat. My name is Dr. Nicole Bojko, and so you can introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Walter Metz. I'm a professor in the Department of Cinema and Photography at Southern Illinois University.
And can you tell me a little more about your background?
Sure, I have an undergraduate degree in materials engineering, and then I decided to go to film school. And so I did a PhD at the University of Texas at Austin in radio, television, film. My initial expertise was in adaptation studies, so my dissertation was about 1950s American films adapted from novels before World War II. In recent years, I've become more and more interested in contemporary film criticism. So I've been running a website, waltermetz.com, and doing local reviews for WSIU, which is our local NPR affiliate, attempting to apply academic methods to films in current release.
Perfect. And so today we're going to be talking about finding a middle ground between academic and popular film criticism. So when I say that topic, Walter, what does that mean to you?
Right. So as an academic, I'm trained to write 25-page research articles that are heavily footnoted, that develop from what we know in the discipline and develop new ground. In 2001, I was asked in Bozeman, Montana to write for the local Arts Monthly, and the most important criteria was it had to fit on one page, which meant about 700 words. I found that I could not do it, that I was constantly running over onto another page and they would yell at me. I got fired in about 6 weeks. The editor was like, "You talk about ideology a lot." And I said, "You do know what film studies is, right?" So from that experience, I began to think about, is it possible to say something in 700 words that's like an academic research article that would actually not completely alienate the editor of a local Arts Monthly? And so I started writing reviews that attempted to do two things at once: to use academic methods, and I mean particularly critical theory, history, to talk about films in current release. And what that allowed me to do was talk about films on a non-academic publishing timeline. Most academic articles are about films from long ago because the timeline in academic publishing is so long. If you're lucky, it'll take as short as 2 years. If you're unlucky, it could take like 5 years. And it seems to me the shelf life of those films has already evaporated by the time the academic article comes out. So by doing things like writing weekly reviews for NPR or posting things to a website, you can get what you have to say about the film out in a more timely fashion, in something that I'm trying to call real time. At the very least, before the DVD release of the film. So when I say middle ground film criticism, I mean something that both has the trappings of academic discourse. It uses ideas to think about how and why these films work. And I don't mean anything too prescriptive by it. I mean aesthetics. So Matt Zoller-Seitz made a passionate plea just for critics to write about film style. So that's something that's evaporating, I think, both from academic criticism, but certainly from popular criticism. So aesthetics, history, I'm an intertextual critic, so I'm interested in the way in which contemporary films can only exist in dialogue with prior films. And then theoretical kinds of matters. So I just wrote a review about the Jordan Peele film Get Out, and I was teaching a media literacy class at the time it came out, and I had the students go to Harvard University's Project Implicit. And what Project Implicit does, it's a sociological experiment. It has you push buttons as you look at pictures of white people and black people, old people and young people, men and women. And it's a tricky test. It starts you out with normative social relations. So it says, take white faces and line them up with goodness, and black faces and line them up with evil. And then halfway through the test, it reverses. And so mostly what the data generates is that a white guy like me is much slower to do the reversal because of the way I'm socially constructed. So I used Project Implicit as a reading frame for Get Out, which is a film about this interracial couple that goes to the small town, and it turns out there's a bunch of racist lunatics killing black guys. So it seemed to me a useful theoretical frame for thinking about how that movie works. So in that case, sociological theory helps you explain the movie. So this is what I mean by academic methods. I'm sure there's a very good 25-page research article about how and why Project Implicit works and how the film works in reference to it. But I don't have either the time or the inclination to write the 25-page research article. I spent my entire career doing that. Instead, I want to talk about more films by just deploying the methods without really fully pursuing the big 25-page research article. And that allows me to get more ideas about films in current release out. In the last 4 years, I've been writing essentially a review a week.
Wow.
So there's some 200 reviews to my website just in 4 years. And that, it seems to me, is an equally important use of my time as writing the sort of normative 5 articles a year and a book every 5 years.
So how do you think that's going in terms of the reception of the project that you're doing?
Yeah, it's still up in the air. I mean, it's hard to tell because I'm a full professor and I don't really think that there's anything at stake for me. I suppose the administrators at my university could say, we don't count that as refereed work. No one said that to me so far, and there seems to be general support for the idea of having academics intervene in the public space fairly aggressively. I've been hedging my bets, so I have undergraduate research assistants. I have my graduate students working in a film criticism working group. And so if nothing else, I can defend it as teaching interventions. So getting the undergrads onto the air on our radio station gives them professional experience. The university's been very generous. They're funding those students to do that work through their undergraduate research program. So all that stuff is very positive, even if not in a research front. The other thing I've been trying to do is sort of double purpose the reviews. So I scan various academic journals that are interested in short format film reviews, and I'll send them. And I think I have about a 50% success rate. So I've been publishing a lot in science fiction, film, and television. I published a piece about the recent boxing film grudge match in the Journal of Sport History. So I've been trying to troll around for very strange places that might be interested in the stuff that I'm writing about. And since my interests are sort of very generalist, weird journals like the Journal of Sport History, because I don't know anything about the academic study of sports, were interested in what I had to say about Grudge Match and its relationship, particularly to the Rocky films and to Raging Bull. So that gives me some kind of academic credibility, right? Those are refereed film journals in which I have publications. They're not quite articles. So I think there's some long-term repercussions of what I'm proposing that would need to be worked out in terms of departmental politics, in terms of promotion and tenure kinds of decisions. But I think that's inevitable. The shift from print journals to online publication is bound up in that. Both the journals in film studies that I'm very fond of, Literature, Film Quarterly, and Film Criticism, have recently shifted to open access online publication. And that, it seems to me, equally problematic for questions of promotion and tenure. So all this is going to have to be worked out in ways that I don't think is very clear what those outcomes might be.
I guess I have my final question to you would be thinking about this topic in the larger frame of our conference, and where is the role of the film critic in filmmaking, and kind of how you see this topic of finding a middle ground between academic and popular film criticism, how that fits into the larger CAD.
Right. So I think for about the last 20 years in my career, I've been trying to fix what's wrong with film school.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Film Criticism Project is probably my most successful intervention. But just to give you another sense that for many years, my film students said, we don't like film theory. So these are film production
Mm-hmm.
students. And it always struck me as strange. Like the use value of film school is that you learn film theory. That's not something they teach you in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And so it always bothered me that film production students rebelled so much against something that seemed so obviously beneficial to them. And then I started to think about it from the other point of view, like what would a film student in Hollywood do with film theory? If they opened their mouth about it, they would get fired.
Mm-hmm.
So I began to think differently about this. I began to say, are there ways that film production students can implicitly apply film theory ideas into their own films?
Mm-hmm.
And so I began teaching a course called Film Production Theory, where film theory was used in subservience to film production. And so there's actually a wonderful book that sort of does this. It's the textbook I use for the class by Jean-Pierre Jean. It's called Film Production Theory. And he's got a chapter devoted to how theory would help you understand camera framing and cinematography and screenwriting and sound. And that's what I attempt to do in my class. I have the students make films in the same way that they would write an academic article that shows the way in which film theory influenced their thinking. As another example, I teach a course, Short Cinema Studies, and I was trying to figure out, why do film production students tend to resist having to take studies classes? And one thing that struck me, which seems so fundamentally obvious, was that they're being asked to make 5-minute narrative films in their production classes, and in film studies, we almost exclusively study features. So I invented a course that said, we're not going to study any features, we're only going to study short film, as a way of showing the students that academic methods about film are very important for understanding short films, and therefore they could use them to understand the movies that they're making. So I think my fundamental intervention into film studies is to try to get film schools to work better. Many of my colleagues in the film industry don't understand what I do. They're like, why would you do that? And it seems to me a shame that there's not more support in the industry for the academic study of film. And so by making coursework that's more tied to what students might do in the Hollywood film industry seems to me a positive intervention into the teaching of film. I think the conversations we're having at this conference indicate many other possibilities. So could we train casting directors better? Could we train executive producers better? Who knows whether the Hollywood film industry would be interested in this, but I know from a scholar's perspective, it's desperately needed that we teach the next generation of filmmakers how to make films very differently than they're being made now, since really the party line in film studies is how horrible these movies are. And so I think it's very important that we try to figure out how to make them less awful in the future. I have my film criticism students watch every film that comes out, and I'm interested in that because I don't want academic film criticism to just be negativist. Look at how racist, sexist, and classist these films are. They certainly are that. But I also think it's worth talking about how these films function more positively. And so in my recent review of this film, Why Him?, I sort of talk about the Shakespearean new comedy and how you need to understand Shakespeare to understand how contemporary Hollywood romantic comedies work. And I think that would be very useful knowledge for everyone making a romantic comedy. And that's not just part of a negativist discourse. It's part of a way of saying, you're going to make romantic comedies no matter what, so why not know the full scope of what romantic comedies can be before you make them?
Well, thank you very much for your time and your insight. And thank you to everyone watching.
Okay, thank you.